at the end. Okay. All right, so I'll start with the First Nations acknowledgement. Well, we begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of First Nations people who have longstanding relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. We also acknowledge the local Lower Thames River watershed communities of this area, which include Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, Munsee Delaware Nation, and Caldwell Nation. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of our local and regional First Nations and all of the original peoples of Turtle Island, which is North America. We are thankful for the opportunity to live, learn, and share with mutual respect and appreciation. So the Lower Thames Valley is one of 36 conservation authorities in Ontario. So we monitor the watershed, which means we monitor water quality, species at risk, planning and regulations, stewardship, and agricultural programming. And right now we have funds available for buffers along waterways, tallgrass prairie, reforestation and wetland restoration projects, as well as cover crop subsidies for farmers. We also want to highlight that our native tree sale is on right now, and details can be found at our website or by contacting anyone in the office. We are also trying to gauge interest in livestock exclusion fencing funding, so please contact us if that is something that you would be interested in. So urban stewardship through the Imagine McGregor program. We like to engage the public in restorative activities throughout our watershed, and we do that through tree planting, litter pickups, creating habitats, removing invasive plants, planting native flowers, and much, much more. So contact us if you have any interest in that. And some of our upcoming events that we have. So Imagine McGregor Ecopsychology Day, that'll be coming this spring. So look out for our sign up for that. And we will be having a winter webinar series, 3rd and 4th installments, and those will be to be announced. So also keep an eye on our social media pages for that as well. So Carol is a PhD, the founder of Canadian Ecopsychology Network, as a professional coach, community ecopsychologist, and a formal environmental studies lecturer at Laurentian University. Originally from London, Ontario, Carol currently lives in Gabarus, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, hosting ecopsychology webinars and mentoring graduate students. She enjoys exploring old trails, gardening in a growing dome, and kayaking on the Atlantic Ocean, which sounds pretty exciting. Again, we'll have a short Q&A period at the end of the webinar, and we ask that you put any of the questions in the Q&A and comments in the chat. If you have a question, that way we can guarantee that we'll get to it. Now I'll hand it over to Carol, and thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I'm just going to share my screen right now. Okay, there it is. Good. So I'd first like to acknowledge where I am sitting. And I live in the traditional territory of the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people under the treaties of peace and friendship. I offer gratitude to the Indigenous people who live here now and who have lived here for thousands of years for the legacy of caring for the land, the water, fire, and air. I acknowledge the many creatures and living beings whose habitat was here and is here today. I acknowledge the ongoing impacts of colonization and systemic oppression of the people and the land on which we reside. Today, as we talk about healing alongside nature, I invite us to uncolonize our work. I invite each of us to widen systems of care and responsibility to include our relationship with all of Earth. Today, I am going to be talking about 3 themes. The first is, what is ecopsychology? The second, and here I'll talk about history, a couple of core concepts. The second is applied ecopsychology in the form of nature connection and a little bit about ecotherapy. And then the third is community ecopsychology, healing alongside nature. I'll cite relevant literature. Get your pencils ready, you got lots of books. Research studies and lots of images. And a couple of stories, which I'd like to start with. When I was invited to share about ecopsychology, I was asked, how did you get into the field? You used to be an IT and business consultant. So I thought that's a good spot that I'd start. So over a decade ago, when I became an empty nester, I sold my home in London, Ontario, and started a series of living experiments. One of my life goals was to live in a log cabin, and so I ended up in the Chilcotin Mountains of British Columbia, which is 6 hours northeast of Whistler. I had found a way to leverage my coaching and IT business consulting skills to work at a wilderness resort and heli-skiing lodge. For 3 years, I enjoyed living in the mountains, and surrounded by the natural world, I came to deeply connect with the seasons and the birth, life, death cycles of life. I witnessed the birth of fawns, baby bear cubs following their mamas, and noticed how huge, felled, decaying trees provided food for the interconnected web of life. And all of this nature connection helped me gracefully accept my own aging process. I also noticed that people responded more openly and positively when I worked outside in staff meetings and in my coach walking and talk sessions. And so, curious to learn more about the human nature connection I had experienced, I ended up getting a scholarship for a master's program at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California, studying depth psychology with an emphasis in ecopsychology. It was during this time that I created the Canadian Ecopsychology Network as part of the fieldwork project, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Creating a little bit more Canadian content, I ended up in Sudbury at Laurentian University to complete an interdisciplinary PhD, and my research focus turned toward community eco-resilience. I toured 20 intentional communities in 7 different countries. During this time, I became an environmental studies lecturer until the university chopped the whole department to avoid bankruptcy. And that was the time I decided to walk my talk. I had been teaching about environment, and it was time to live it. And so I ended up in Gabarus, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, a 300-year-old fishing village of 87 people. I love living a more balanced life on the ocean and learning all about the new flora and fauna. And I'm slowly learning to bring my community eco-psychology through food sovereignty and gardening to this new community. So it's through these lenses of eco-psychology, environmental studies, eco-resilience, community, and a privileged position as an eldering white woman that I share this presentation. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. What is eco-psychology? Eco-psychology studies the relationship between human beings and the natural environment through both ecological and psychological principles. Eco-psychology seeks to develop and understand ways of expanding the emotional connection between individuals and the natural environment, thereby assisting individuals with developing sustainable lifestyles and remedying alienation from nature. Eco-psychology explores human psychological interdependence with the rest of nature and the implications for identity, health, and well-being. So just a quick note that there is a difference between eco-psychology and environmental psychology. Environmental psychology is more of an academic discipline that includes natural and built environments such as buildings and other man-made infrastructures. Environmental psychology utilizes quantitative research methods to gather data. Eco-psychology, on the other hand, is a very broad, interdisciplinary, evolving field that doesn't quite fit with the modern model of psychology. And to understand this better, let's look at the etymology or the root of the term eco-psychology. So what I learned from one of my profs, Dr. Edward Casey, who wrote the book, Getting Back into Place, we kind of looked into ecopsychology and noticed that the root of the word eco comes from the Greek word oikos, which is house, dwelling, home. And then the root word of psyche is breath, spirit, soul. So when you put these two together, one definition could be ecopsychology is the study of the relationships between home and soul. And when you talk about soul, you have to talk about Carl Jung to a certain degree, who kind of brought forward the conversation between conscious, unconscious, collective unconscious, spirit, psyche, soul. And I'm not going to dive into this rabbit hole, but I just wanted to give a nod that this has been a part of the ecopsychology philosophies. The term itself, ecopsychology, and a vision for the field were first publicly articulated by a social historian, Theodore Roszak, in his 1992 book, Voice of the Earth. Some of the themes include humanity's rootedness in the web of life, relationships between our own sanity and the non-human world, bridging centuries-old splits between the psychological and the ecological, and the needs of the planet and the needs of the person as being on a continuum. And I just have to mention the 1982 work of ecologist Paul Shepard, when he wrote the book Nature and Madness. Shepard uncovers the cultural roots of our ecological crisis and proposes ways to repair broken bonds with the earth, our past, and nature. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and we have the second generation of ecopsychology in the form of radical ecopsychology. And this is the work of Dr. Andy Fisher from the Perth, Ontario area. One of our leading ecopsychologists is Canadian, yay. And Andy extends Roszak's work to be the psychology in the service of life. The starting point for modern psychology is that of a hyper-individualized self, alienated from both human social relations and from relations with our earth home. And Andy's triangle model kind of illustrates how we have a nature-human connection, but also nature has a societal community, and then humans are embedded into society. And we're broken in all of these things, at least the Western world is. So radical ecopsychology actually has two components to it. One is the recollective sense, is about remembering how we belong to the earth, how everything about us came out of the land, and our interrelationships with countless other than human beings. Ecopsychology is often defined by the claim that human well-being is synergistically linked to the well-being of the planet. The critical side of ecopsychology asks why we are starved and disconnected in the first place. What are the historical forces, the structures of social relations that deaden and disconnect the person while also wasting the planet? And I like this Desmond Tutu quote, reminding us that we need to pull people out of the water, but we also have to go upstream and figure out why they're falling in. So from an ecopsych perspective, we got to keep connecting people to the natural world, but we have to address why we're becoming disconnected. And I want to just spend a moment here to touch on the spiritual aspect of ecopsychology, which hasn't really been developed. Because for thousands of years, people have been going into nature to seek a connection with something greater than themselves. And I know when I'm surrounded by nature on solo hikes or just out stargazing, I am never alone. I feel connected to life. And this was important for me to remember, especially during COVID lockdown, when I was living in a 5th floor apartment overlooking a parking lot. I was struggling big time. And I needed that balance to get out and connect with nature on a regular basis. I'd like to stress when I talk about spirituality and connection, I'm not talking about organized religion per se, although I will note that every religious leader went into the wilderness at some time to listen with their hearts for guidance. Ecopsychology treats the relationship with nature as a spiritual path, connecting with the web of life with something greater than ourselves is part of the ecopsychological process. Couple other things we want to mention here. That's biophilia. Biophilia translates to love of life, a fascination and communion with nature that stems from an innate, biologically driven need to interact with other forms of life. This is why we're attracted to puppies and plants. We're attracted to life. And it's thought that the term originated from the renowned psychologist Erich Fromm, but was popularized by Harvard biologist Edward O. Wilson in the 1984 book, Biophilia. Biophilic design is a method of designing the places in which we live and work in such a way that satisfies our deep and fundamental need to be connected to nature. And this is a big concept in landscape architecture, and you see it's becoming popularized with green walls, natural lighting, and lots of natural landscapes being introduced into the built environment. Of course, the opposite to biophilia is biophobia. Biophobia is the fear of nature or elements such as snakes, spiders, or bears. And there's evolutionary roots to this, learning which animals and plants were harmful or poisonous, protected our ancestors, and conferred a higher likelihood of survival. And I'm reminded of the Woody Allen quote, "I like nature, I just don't want to get any of it on me." That's biophobia. I also recall a family that came, I think, from Tokyo over to the resort that I was leading little nature hikes at in the mountains in BC, and mom, dad, 2 kids, and the kids had never walked on earth. They had only walked on cement and asphalt, and their little bodies couldn't handle the uneven terrain. It was heartbreaking. But the biophobia showed up when the little guy, 5-year-old, got bitten by a mosquito, had a little meltdown, and wouldn't leave his room for 3 days. That's biophobia. That's what happens when we don't get our kids outside. Another concept I'd like to share is that of solastalgia. And it's a form of homesickness one gets when one is still at home. The term was coined in 2003 by an Australian scholar, Glenn Albrecht. And I think that was at a conference in Montreal, actually, an EcoHealth conference. Solastalgia refers to a particular form of psychological distress that's environmentally induced. And he wrote a book, Earth Emotions, I believe, 2018, which talks in depth about solastalgia, but other earth emotions as we head into this new era. Solastalgia is the feeling of a familiar environment having suddenly changed and no longer offers the same comforts it once did. It's kind of a nostalgia that one can experience at home, a sense that things have suddenly and permanently changed. A deep existential dread comes from loss that is difficult to put into words. So this is an image from Hurricane Fiona. I lived through that. It was quite a thing. And this was from the community of Port Basque on Newfoundland's southwestern tip, when 85 to 90 houses were actually either washed out or rendered uninhabitable by storm surge and resulting floods. The homeowners experienced solastalgia. In my little village, my neighbor actually lost these 200-year-old trees. He's in his 80s, and his grandmother had planted them. And he experienced solastalgia because home just didn't feel the same without these trees. I know I have this existential dread when I hear that there's high winds or a nor'easter coming. And I just kind of have to hunker down and wait to see what happens. So a little quick summary is that Ecopsychology is a philosophical study of human-nature relations. It's looking at our home and our soul and our spirit. It's an interdisciplinary field. I've listed already biology, ecology, psychology, social history, spirituality. Andy Fisher reminds us, recollective piece, remembering that we are part of the natural world. And then a critical piece that not many people want to dive into, but where we have to move on beyond individuals to consider the role of community and society. The underlying spiritual aspect, we need to get out of our big brains and make emotive heart connections. So what's the praxis or some practical applications of ecopsychology? Well, applied ecopsychology shows up as nature connection and ecotherapy. And I love this Thich Nhat Hanh quote about walk as if your feet are kissing the earth. And to that, I would add, and if you do, the earth will kiss you back. And this is an example, this image is an example of earthing or grounding, and it refers to the discovery that bodily contact with the earth's natural electrical charge stabilizes the physiology at the deepest levels and reduces inflammation, pain, and stress, improves blood flow, energy, and sleep, and generates greater well-being. One of my friends, who's actually a pharmacist, 2 decades ago told me about this. So if you can remember anything, it's get outside, walk barefoot, you'll feel better. Nature connection. Many of us intuitively know that being in nature is good for us, and research backs this up, showing that people who are more connected with nature often report greater life satisfaction, lower levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, and greater levels of emotional and mental well-being. Nature connection means 2 things: the act of personally engaging with nature through sensory awareness and observation skills. It also refers to the mental, physical, and emotional benefits that occur as a result of spending quality time in nature. And there's lots being written about this right now. So I'm distilling it down into kind of 3 areas for nature connection. And the first is noticing nature. Connection with nature is about really tuning in to your surroundings and noticing what is happening around you through all of your senses: sight, sound, smell, touch, and even taste. And you don't necessarily need to move at all. In fact, the slower you go, the better you tend to connect. And I'm sure some of you have heard of the concept or the activity, nature connection activity of a sit spot. And a sit spot is where you go to the same spot and you can sit as this woman has here, in a chair or whatever, and just let yourself immerse into and be surrounded by that which surrounds us. And 10, 20, 30 minutes a day, do this, or a couple times a week. And just notice when you do it and over again. And I found it really hard to do it. The slight changes around you, and through that process you'll start noticing the slight changes inside of you. And this is another part then, is feeling the connection with nature. Nature connection activities should help you to feel more in tune with nature and a part of nature rather than separate from it. We need to appreciate the wonder and beauty in nature rather than just about all of the knowledge. Nature connection involves shifting your attention and focus from learning about what something in nature is to how things in nature make you feel. And I do realize that education is an important piece, but again, we get stuck in our heads and we don't, some of us need to reconnect at an emotive level. And the third piece here then is reflecting on the nature connection. So nature connection activities usually involve some reflection on what you experienced, either writing or creating a nature journal, talking about the experience with other eco-buddies. And I know when I was teaching restorative environments and human health up at Laurentian, which is a 4th-year course, this is what the students had to do. They had to do a sit spot, and then a nature journal, and that was one of their activities. So if there's any teachers out there, it is a really good reflection piece. Other connection activities, actually it doesn't have to be complicated, just spending time outside in a mindful way. Leave the technology at home. Don't be tempted to take pictures or notes or answer calls. The concept of forest bathing is big. Meditative walking, the Buddhist concept of meditative walking, where you walk so slow that you get surrounded by that, by the nature. Basically, spending quality time outside. There's no recipe, there's no fancy schmancy way to do it. It's just getting outside. Now, this is kind of like a traditional, really immersive kind of approach. However, we do have something called frolicking. And I just saw this the other day and I thought, oh my goodness, here's another example of nature connection. It's spontaneous, simple, fun. This young man is connecting with the earth. He's feeling lots of things and he's sharing it. You know, we all have to start someplace. I'm sure he's feeling great. He's sharing with his buddies. Maybe next time some of his buddies will come frolic with him. And then maybe they'll start picking up some trash or getting involved in the environment. So it doesn't have to be a recipe nature connection. It can just be a simple frolic. So there are benefits of nature connection, and this is a really good book, The Nature Fix by Florence Williams, if you want to really do a deep dive in it. And as the previous lad showed us, happiness is one of the major benefits: childlike wonder, curiosity, and innocent joy. Vitality, a feeling of an abundance of energy in the body. I know today, after my little nature walk, I went up to one of the elders in the village and I knocked on the door and offered to shovel out their front porch and their driveway. I had so much energy. Focus is a benefit. Listening to others unconditionally, and also part of this is mentoring. Empathy for people and other living things. This is a biggie. Benefit of nature connection is a deep ethic born of a conscious awareness of our interdependence with all others, a commitment to service to others, the future generations, conservation, sustainable and regenerative living principles. Aliveness, increased sense of gratitude and appreciation for life itself. Love, greater capacity for understanding, compassion, and forgiveness. And presence, access to greater creativity and a quiet mind. Well, oh my goodness, who doesn't want more of this in your life? It's simple. Get outside, get connected. And what happens when we don't have the benefits of nature? We get what's called nature deficit disorder. And it's a term used to describe what happens when people disconnect from their natural surroundings. From our flat screen TVs to our climate controlled buildings, we don't dwell outside as much as our ancestors did. It's estimated that Canadians spend 90% of their time indoors, and 1.1 million have a vitamin D deficiency. Well, some of us may know that all you have to do is get outside and get some sunshine on your eyeballs to help with the vitamin D deficiency. Richard Louv coined the term when he wrote the international best-selling book in 2005, The Last Child in the Woods. He also wrote The Nature Principle and Vitamin N. Evidence suggests that nature deficit disorder contributes to a diminished sense of senses, attention difficulties, conditions of obesity, and higher rates of emotional and physical illnesses. To just underscore this a little bit more, Richard Louv says that the child in nature is an endangered species. On average, children spend up to 44 hours per week in front of a screen and less than 10 minutes a day playing outdoors. Kids won't remember their best day of YouTube, or I guess it's TikTok now, but they will remember playing in the puddle, pond, or building a fort. Unfortunately, for too many kids, regular and safe access to nature is determined by race, income, identity, ability, and postal code. Big people, we need to do more to help little people get connected. One of the things Richard did when the book came out is create the Children in Nature Network. And this website has a ton of resources, including infographics, illustrating the benefits of time in nature. So children spending time in nature have better social skills, enhanced health, increased self-esteem, and improved grades. And every one of those little footnotes that you see there are actually different research articles with data proving this. It's not just vague concepts. There's actually over 1,000 pieces of literature that research with data to support all of these claims. Nature play can encourage care for the earth, pro-environmental behaviors, stronger emotional connections to people and nature. This is what I want for my grandchildren and my grandchildren's children. Okay, so moving from nature connection from children, let's talk a little bit about nature ecotherapy, where nature is a co-therapist. So the term ecotherapy, there isn't one single definition, but it's often used to describe a regular structured activity that's led by trained professionals who are there to support us. Therapists emphasize that we are nature, and that when we've lost our connection to nature, we've lost a connection to ourselves. So when we reconnect to nature, we're reconnecting to ourselves. What I'd like to do is share a study now on the value of nature during psychotherapy. And it's a qualitative study of the client experiences. So these are client or patient words. This present study indicates that the natural world brings clients closer to their inner worlds. And here are some of the words that help describe what nature as co-therapist shows up as. Nature is neutral, does not judge. There's open space. Nature's alive, it grows. It's ever-changing, but nonetheless timeless and is fascinating. To me, that's a very interesting co-therapist. So what does that do for us? Well, it puts things in perspective. It soothes, it liberates, it relieves. Again, these are client words. And what does that mean for us? Inner peace in mind and body, close to my emotions, my essence, part of something greater than oneself. That is my big reminder there. And not so much as a patient. And therefore, I'm able to be me. So you'll probably see more studies like this, but I just thought I'd bring it forward. And the whole field of eco-psychotherapy is emerging. And my colleague, Mary Jane Rust in the UK is developing this. So if there's any clinicians online, this is a good little book. My mentor, Linda Bazell, has listed a whole bunch of different ecotherapies, different ways of connecting. And just to go through a couple, when we say cognitive, it's just a reminder that we are nature, that we're not separate from it. Horticultural ecotherapy, there's the Canadian Horticultural Therapy Association, which is brand new in the last couple of years, which is diving into this. And it's looking at plant-based regenerative agriculture, care farms, and nutrition. Another one I found interesting is lifestyle ecotherapies. And here's one that you can do, is actually keep a time diary to track how much time spent each week indoors versus outdoors. How much time when you're indoors or how much time do you interact with screens versus living beings, human and more than human. Somatic therapies, focused on healing the relationship between wild nature in our bodies and all that lives in and around us. And it can include fields like sacred movement and dance, mindfulness and meditation, parapsychology. This can include a focus on healing our relationships with place, whether we're indigenous to that place or a settler, understanding the history, biology, and geology wherever we are. It's focusing on a search for a right relation with the earth where we live. And eco-spirituality, earth-based rituals, ceremony, understandings, and reverent practices. There's lots of ways that you can practice ecotherapy and nature connection, and they can be done at different levels. So I have identified, well, there are 2 levels. I'm proposing a third. Let's look at the first, though. Level 1 is using some aspect of nature to heal one or more humans. So nature is a background. It's animals, plants, landscape. It's our starting point for getting connected. When it turns into becoming just a big rec room, another just playground, and there's no real connection, then we want to nudge ourselves to move into level 2, reciprocal healing, which focuses on Earth's well-being as well as our own. And I have this picture here of hugging a tree because that seems to be a fad, is let's go out and hug trees. But honestly, would you go out and just hug a person without asking permission? Some random stranger? Of course not. That's an invasion of personal space. So what I've learned to do, what I've been taught, is to ask permission. Hello, tree, my name's Carol, and I'd really like to give you a hug. And then stand and wait, and you will get a response. If a mosquito bites you, then that's probably a no. If you feel a nice little breeze, then maybe that's an invitation. It's yes. And I do this anytime I want to sit under a tree, touch a tree, I ask permission. And then I express gratitude. Thank you for giving me shade. I was really hot. I really appreciate it. And I apologize for any harm. So a deep respect for the natural world is part of reciprocal healing. Doing homework to understand the ecology of place, plants, and creatures in the ecosystem. Honoring the sacred in this aspect of nature. I visited a bunch of little communities in Italy that were kind of a bunch of villages strung together, and every little village, which was just a small collection of houses, they had a welcoming tree. And part of the routine, part of their daily routine was they would come up to the tree when they came home, put their head on the tree, introduce themselves, welcome, connect with the tree, thank the tree for watching over them. And anytime they left their home, they would do the thing. The tree had become part of their extended family, part of their community. And then the last is getting involved in hands-on healing of landscapes, plants, all those great restoration things that were mentioned earlier. And to kind of illustrate this a little bit is moving from level 1 to level 2 is, I ran into this, saw this on Facebook, is, we've domesticated a bunch of creatures for our own healing, but how is that healing our bigger ecosystem? And so my question to you to think about is, how do you repay nature for your nature connection healing? How do you repay nature or thank nature for all the life services that it provides with the air and the water and the soil? We need reciprocity. And then moving into level 3, community connections, where we heal right alongside nature, I propose a level 3 community connections. And the ecosystem restoration decade up by the United Nations, to me, in my simple mind, is a perfect example of this. So I'd like to share a study conducted out of Tucson, Arizona by a group of academics who are studying ecological restoration as a health intervention. The high school program engaged both Anglo and Hispanic youth from low-income households in urban and rural communities along the Arizona-Mexico border in the greater Sonoran Desert. The program's experiential learning allowed youth to become engaged in hands-on restoration work in coniferous forests, oak savannas, mesquite grasslands, deserts, wetlands, and urban landscapes. Each crew and its facilitators spent 32 hours a week for 6 weeks of paid work, focusing on restorative activities, working outside with other young people that include direct contact with the soil, microbiome, and water bodies, and volatile organic compounds from plants. They wanted to get their hands in the earth. And they completed all kinds of restoration activities, erosion control structures, propagation seeds of native plants for pollinators, rebuilding migratory corridors for endangered species, cultivating plants in gardens, farms, and nurseries, building ponds for fish and aquatic wildlife, planting trees and sowing wildflowers, restoring springs and wetlands, and removing invasive species. And then they did baseline health records and then a pre and post fieldwork questionnaire. And the results consistently document the positive effects of the program. So regardless of what restoration activity they did, whether it was urban or rural, whether it was wetlands or in the desert, it didn't matter. The results were consistent. The students had increases in capacity for environmental restoration. There was an increased sense of community and social responsibility, improved emotional and physical strength, and increases in leadership and weight loss. Well, wonderful. I wish all high school students would have the ability to experience these positive effects. So this is the Borderlands Restoration Organization, which has done a lot of good work. Now, I do understand and I do acknowledge Canada has done tons of stuff, but what I haven't been able to find is actually a study recording or documenting or gathering of data showing the human benefit as well too. And if anybody in the audience has anything, please forward it to me. I'd love to start using more Canadian examples. Another example of, in my mind, of level 3 community healing, and some of you probably already know that, is the National Healing Forests here in Canada. In May 2022, David Suzuki endorsed the National Healing Forest Initiative, supporting this community-based project because it aims to address the intersection of Indigenous reconciliation, education, and environmental advocacy, along with individual and collective healing. And I like sharing the origin story because I think it's fascinating how it emerged. In 2015, during a Truth and Reconciliation Commission Solidarity Walk in Ottawa, Peter Kroll, a professional geologist, overcome with grief, decided to take action and do something. In a presentation to the Canadian Ecopsychology Network in 2018, Peter describes this moment and how the spirit of the trees encouraged him to begin some healing action. And that's where the healing forests came from. Walking with 10,000 other people, Peter spontaneously shared his thoughts with a woman walking next to him, Patricia Stursby, Cowessess First Nation, Saskatchewan, a lawyer. They met for coffee and the Healing Forest Project was born. The forests are meant to honor residential school victims and survivors, as well as missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So in my neck of the woods here in Cape Breton, just up the road from me, at the Riverside School in Albert Bridge, they've developed a 2-kilometer interactive path in the forest next to the school grounds. It's called the Knowledge Path, and it's a space for outdoor learning that can be enjoyed by students and the wider community. Hereditary Chief Stephen Augustine and Riverside School Principal Suzanne Brown co-created this unique healing forest. It is an outdoor classroom, getting students much needed more time outside. It protects the forests while educating students and the general public of the flora and the fauna of the ecosystem in the Mi'kmaq language. It encourages Indigenous and non-Indigenous sharing. It's hard to substantiate the impacts of the healing forests. However, the popularity of this new approach is tangible because, along with the original 10 sites, 16 new healing forests were initiated in 2022. Peter and Patricia created the healing forest to combine reconciliation and healing into one nature-based immersive experience. This is the essence of community healing, going beyond personal healing strategies to include a community of people along with non-human nature to catalyze the healing process. To support the whole community focus, here's environmentalist Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org, sorry. And one of the most frequent questions he gets is, what can I do with this whole environmental mess that we're in? And his response is, the most important thing an individual can do is not be an individual. We need to work to move towards a more cooperative culture and unlearn competitive individualism. And as an aside, the second question he gets asked most is, where can I go to avoid what's coming? And he said, there is no place to go. The thing to do is to find a community or build a community and hunker down. See, Bill believes that the technology we need most badly right now is the technology of community, the knowledge about how to cooperate to get things done. Ecopsychology studies the relationships between humans and our home. Applied ecopsychology is nature connection, fully connecting to our home. And ecotherapy, nature as a co-therapist, healing our disconnections from ourselves, other humans, and the non-human world. And it's community connections where we really see the most healing alongside nature, because we involve human communities helping other communities of life. And I think this is what Andy Fisher has referred to as psychology in the service of life. And what I'd like to do now is just to do a little spiel about the Canadian Ecopsychology Network. And this was formed, oh my goodness, over 8 years ago. And it was dedicated to just bringing eco-professionals and eco-keeners, I should say, together for the purpose of providing a public forum for our diverse experience with the human-nature relationship. And we meet online the third Wednesday of every month. It's free to the public, it's volunteer driven. In February, we're having Dr. Jackie Seidel from the University of Calgary talk about children's planetary wellness. In March, we're having Dr. Craig Chalquist talk about mythology and the environmental crisis. And in April, we have Tanya Rodriguez and Peggy Ayers talking about Indigenous decolonization and settler uncolonization. So a very diverse set of topics. This is a virtual group attracting members from Canada, the US, UK, EU, South Africa, and Australia, I think a few. And this is a virtual group that we're sharing in right now. But I just want to remind everyone that every one of us lives on some part of the earth. And so I invite us to say hello to place, the place where we are, and connect with the non-human world and broaden our sense of social ecological community. Get outside, get some vitamin N, it will increase your vitamin D. Connect with nature, share, do something, get active. You'll feel better and Mother Earth will appreciate it. I am complete. Thank you for listening.
Okay, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Carol. Definitely inspired me to get outside, even though it's quite cold down here in southwestern Ontario right now. For those that are local, just remember the LTVCA does have a ton of conservation areas around this area that you can find more details on from our website. Now we have a lot of people in the chat saying thank you. They really enjoyed it, coming from a variety of different places. And we just have 3 questions in the Q&A. If anyone has any more, please drop them now, and we'll get started with that. One moment, I'm just ending the recording. Okay.